They said the client was difficult. They said the pay was extraordinary, and that she shouldn't ask why the two things were related. They didn't tell her that the last nurse had walked out without her paycheck, without her jacket, and with a look on her face like she'd seen something she was trying very hard to forget. Orla Devane learned that part from the building's front desk attendant, who'd whispered it like a warning while sliding her a visitor pass. By then, it was too late to care. She had already taken the job. The call had come on a Tuesday. Orla was 45 minutes into her lunch break, sitting in the staff room at the walk-in clinic on Commercial Drive, staring at a text from her brother Caden that she'd read 6 times without being able to process it. 12 days. That's what Finch's people had given him. 12 days to produce $22,000, or Caden would lose more than his dignity in a parking garage somewhere off East Hastings. The clinic paid Orla a reasonable wage for a licensed practical nurse. Reasonable didn't touch $22,000. Then a number she didn't recognize called her. The voice on the other end was flat, efficient, the kind of voice that didn't waste breath on pleasantries. "Miss Devane, we have a private nursing position that requires immediate placement. 2 weeks, $12,000 per week cash. Accommodation provided, non-disclosure required." Orla had asked one question, "What's the catch?" A pause. Then, "The client has a difficult t—" She took the job. The SUV collected her from the corner of Main and Broadway at 6 p.m. sharp. Rain was coming off the North Shore in sheets, the kind that made Vancouver feel like the world was being rinsed clean of its sins. The driver didn't speak. The windows were dark. They crossed the Burrard Bridge and pulled into the underground parking of a glass tower in Cole Harbour that Orla had walked past 100 times without ever wondering who lived at the top of it. A man was waiting for her in the elevator lobby. He introduced himself as Slade, just Slade, no last name offered, and he had the particular bearing of someone whose job involved standing between his employer and the rest of the world. He was holding a manila folder. "Non-disclosure agreement," he said, offering it to her. "You sign, you work, you talk. That's a separate conversation you don't want to have." Orla flipped to the last page and signed without reading it. She'd already decided she didn't have the luxury of hesitation. "The patient," she said, handing the folder back. "What's the injury?" "Left lateral thorax, entry and exit, complicated by delayed treatment and infection." How delayed? Slade's expression didn't change. 11 days. Orla closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. He's septic. Possibly. Who managed the wound for 11 days? He did. She opened her eyes. "Take me up." The 32nd floor was a private residence, the entire floor, sealed behind a biometric door that Slade opened with his thumb. The space beyond was vast and cold, all grey concrete and floor-to-ceiling glass looking out over the harbour, the North Shore mountains dissolving into low cloud beyond. The furniture was expensive and looked largely untouched, like a showroom where someone happened to be bleeding. Slade pointed her toward the far end of the corridor. "Wound supplies are on the kitchen counter. He missed his antibiotic dose this morning. And yesterday morning." "Why?" He threw them at the wall. Orla picked up the medical bag Slade had assembled on a side table and walked to the end of the hall. She knocked once on the door of the primary suite. No answer. She pushed it open. The room was dim, blackout curtains drawn against the city lights outside. She could smell the infection before her eyes adjusted. That particular sweet metal edge that every nurse learned to dread. He was sitting in a low chair facing the window, and the outline of him in the darkness was like a study in deliberate stillness. Broad-shouldered, controlled, breathing too carefully. "Mr. Marlowe," she said, keeping her voice even. "I'm Orla Devane. I'm your nurse for the next 2 weeks." "I don't recall requesting a nurse." His voice was low and measured, but she could hear the fever underneath it, that slight roughness at the edges, the way a hot coal sounds different from a cold one. "You didn't request one. Someone with more sense than you did." She moved to the bedside lamp and turned it on. "I need to look at the wound." When the light hit him, Orla had to concentrate very hard on keeping her face neutral. Dax Marlowe was, she would find a clinical word for this later, imposing, even half-collapsed in a chair with a 3-week beard and fever-bright eyes. He was in his mid-30s, with the kind of build that came from hard use rather than any gym, and a jaw set at an angle that made it clear he spent a great deal of his time refusing things. His shirt was unbuttoned to the 3rd button. The bandaging around his left side was brown at the edges. Homemade, stubborn. His eyes found hers in the lamplight and made a fast, comprehensive calculation, deciding what category to put her in. "You're not scared," he said. "I don't get paid to be scared. I get paid to fix what's broken. Lift your arm." The last nurse. I don't care about the last nurse, she said, pulling on gloves. Lift your arm, Mr. Marlowe. Something shifted in his expression. He lifted his arm. The wound was a mess. The entry was clean enough. The exit had torn muscle on its way out, and 11 days of improvised bandaging had turned the surrounding tissue angry and wet. Orla cleaned it without commentary, working quickly, her hands steady. He flinched twice and said nothing about either time. You need IV antibiotics, she said. Oral dosing isn't going to be enough at this stage. I'm going to set up a line. Fine. I also need you to eat something before the next dose. Your blood pressure is low. It's not low. I measured it this morning. And what was the reading? A pause 90/60. That's low, Mr. Marlowe. He exhaled through his nose. It was the closest thing to agreement she was going to get, she suspected. When the dressing was done and the IV line was taped, she gathered the used supplies into a biohazard bag and stood. He was watching her, had been watching her the entire time, that grey-eyed calculation running quietly in the background. You'll need to stay in bed for the next 48 hours, she said. I'll be back at 8 tomorrow morning. Don't pull the line. Miss Devane. She paused at the door. The antibiotics. He gestured at the pill bottles on the nightstand. Leave them. You've been throwing them at walls. I was making a point. The infection doesn't care about your points. She picked up the bottles, looked at him, and set them back down beside the IV bag, clearly labeled. Take the IV. I'll bring the oral dose in the morning. You can throw it at me if you like. I'm harder to miss than a wall. She thought she heard something on her way out, too brief and too quiet to be certain of. It might have been a laugh. It didn't sound like it had much practice. By the third morning, a routine had shaped itself around them like something half alive, tentative, pressured, but there. 8 o'clock. Vitals. Dressing change. Argument about the breakfast slate left outside the door. Noon. Antibiotic dose. Argument about whether Dax was allowed to answer emails yet. 8 in the evening. Second dressing, second argument, then silence. The silence was the part Orla hadn't expected. It wasn't hostile. It was particular. The kind of quiet that happens when two people have already mapped each other's edges and are deciding separately what to do with that information. Dax Marlowe didn't fill silences with noise. He let them sit. Orla, who'd spent most of her working life surrounded by the controlled chaos of a walk-in clinic. Printers, phones, the particular pitch of a child who did not want a vaccination, found it unexpectedly restful. She also picked up things she hadn't asked for, that he took his coffee without sugar, and wouldn't explain why, but the way he said it suggested something had been given up a long time ago, that he read in the evenings, actual books, paperbacks with cracked spines, that the infection clearing from his wound corresponded directly with a very slight, very careful thaw in the way he looked at her, like she was shifting from one category to another that didn't yet have a name. On the fourth evening, he asked about Caden. You're doing this for someone, he said, not a question. Orla kept her eyes on the dressing tape she was cutting. Everyone does things for someone. Most people doing this kind of work do it for the money. I am doing it for the money. You're doing it to give the money to a specific someone, Dax said. He wasn't being cruel about it. He was simply being accurate, which was somehow worse. Slade ran your background. Your brother has a problem with the slots. The scissors stilled. That's not your business. It became my business when you walked through that door. He said it without apology. Caden Devane, 24. Hours 22,000 to Finch's operation on East Hastings. Orla set the scissors down on the tray very carefully. If you're planning to use that to leverage something, I need to know now. Dax looked at her for a moment. I'm not. He held out his arm for the line. I'm telling you because Finch's people have been asking questions about your location. Someone has been answering them. A cold feeling settled in her stomach. Caden wouldn't. He's desperate. He's my brother. Dax said nothing. He didn't have to. She couldn't sleep that night. She lay in the guest room with its grey linen and grey harbour view and told herself that Caden wouldn't, that he was reckless and unlucky and occasionally exhausting, but that he wouldn't sell his own sister's location to a loan shark's collection arm. She told herself this until approximately 2 in the morning, when she heard voices she didn't recognize coming from the corridor outside. She had learned in 4 days which voices belonged in this penthouse. Slade. The 2 men on the overnight detail. She knew their cadences. This was someone else. She cracked her door open. 2 men she didn't know were standing at the junction of the hallway, speaking low. One had the flat, mean face she'd seen once in a car outside Caden's building on Kingsway, one of Finch's. She'd know that face anywhere. Give it another hour, the stranger was saying. The overnight detail switches at 3. Marlowe's not mobile. The nurse is a non-issue. Keep it clean, Finch's man said, no loose ends. Orla eased her door shut without a sound. She stood in the dark with her back against the wall and her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her back teeth. And she understood several things very quickly. Someone in this building had let them in. Dax was going to be killed. And she was apparently a non-issue, which meant she was also going to be killed, just incidentally. She picked up the medical bag from the desk. It was the only thing within reach, which was absurd. But she had learned in her first year of clinical work that in a crisis you used what you had. She moved to Dax's door and knocked soft but fast. A pause, then his voice alert, not the voice of someone who had been sleeping. Come in. He was already sitting up. He read her face in the lamplight and was on his feet before she'd said a word, which put considerable strain on the IV line still taped to his arm, and none at all on his composure. How many, he said quietly. 2 in the hall, Finch's crew. He was already at the dresser. You know Finch. He's the one who has my brother's debt. Dax's hands stilled for half a second. Your brother told them where you were. It wasn't a question. It landed in her chest like something dropped from a height. He didn't know what they were going to do with it, she said. She didn't know yet if she believed that. Dax looked at her. Lock the door and get behind the bed. I'm not getting behind the bed. Orla. He said her name for the first time. Just her first name quietly, with a precision that stopped the rest of her sentence cold. Lock the door. If this goes wrong, there's a stairwell exit behind the bookcase. Code is 5731. Slates is already awake. How do you know that? Because I texted him 2 minutes ago. He turned to face her, and what she saw in his expression then wasn't what she'd braced for. Not coldness, not calculation, but something deliberate and careful. I need you out of the middle of this. She locked the door. She did not get behind the bed. What happened next lasted approximately 8 minutes and sounded like a very short, very focused thunderstorm. She pressed herself to the wall beside the locked door, clutching the medical bag to her chest, and listened to sounds she had only ever heard in films before, and hoped she would never hear in a building she was standing inside. Then silence. Then a knock. It's me, Slade said through the door. He looked considerably more rumpled than usual. Dax was in the corridor behind him, leaning against the wall with one hand pressed to his left side. He was upright. That was the most important thing. He was upright. You pulled the IV out, Orla said. I needed both hands. You? She crossed the corridor and pressed her fingers to his side and felt the wet heat soaking through his shirt. He had torn the wound open again. You absolute menace. Something that was almost a smile crossed his face. The situation is resolved. You have 3 inches of reopened suture line. 4, Slade offered entirely unhelpfully. She got Dax back into the room. She got him onto the bed. She resutured him in a silence that was steadier than she'd have any right to expect from herself, and she would be surprised by that later, when she had the luxury of retrospect. He bore it without complaint, watching the top of her head with that grey-eyed attention she'd gotten used to. When the new dressing was taped, and his blood pressure had climbed back to something that didn't make her want to sit down on the floor, she settled on the edge of the bed and let the adrenaline leave her body all at once, which was not a dignified process. Caden told them, she said. She said it out loud because she needed to hear it in her own voice to make it real. He told them where you'd gone, Dax said. He didn't tell them to act on it. Those were 2 different decisions made by different people. He gave them the key that opened the door. Yes, he said. He did. She looked at her hands. There was still blood under her nails from the suturing. I went into debt trying to pay off his debt. I came here to save him. I know. And he? I know, Dax said, quietly without filling it with anything extra. She looked up at him. The penthouse was very still. Outside, the city lay spread across its grid of lights, the mountains invisible in the early morning dark above the harbor. What happens now, she asked, to Finch's people? That question answers itself. And Caden? A pause. What do you want to happen to Caden? She thought about her brother, about teaching him to skate on the rink behind their parents' house in Kelowna when he was 6, about the particular, bone-deep exhaustion of being the older sibling who kept pulling someone back from the edge they couldn't stop approaching. I want him scared enough to stop, she said, but I don't want him hurt. Dax studied her for a long moment. I can guarantee the first part, he said. The second depends on him. That's fair. He reached out, slowly giving her time to move if she chose, and took her hand where it rested on the blanket. His grip was careful, almost deliberate, like a man choosing each word of a sentence he'd revised several times before speaking. "The debt is cleared," he said. "Both of them, your brother's 22,000, and whatever you think you owe the world for keeping him from drowning in it all these years." I didn't finish the 2 weeks. "You resutured me in a crisis and didn't once lose your nerve. You've more than earned your wage." "Not losing your nerve is literally the minimum for a nurse," she said. "It's not a remarkable achievement." "In my experience," Dax said, "is." He was quiet for a moment. "Stay." She looked at him. "The position has been redefined, I think. That's an unusual offer. I'm an unusual man. You're a dangerous one." "Yes," he said. No apology, no dressing it up. She had come in 4 days to appreciate that about him, the complete absence of pretense about what he was. "And you are the only person who has walked through that door and treated me like a problem worth solving rather than a monster to be endured. That's," he paused, "considerably rarer than I'd like to admit." Orla looked at their hands. She thought about the clinic on Commercial Drive, the staff room, the red-lettered bank notifications, the particular weight of treading water for years in a lake that kept quietly getting wider. She thought about the way he'd said her name in the dark, just the once, precisely, like it meant something specific to him. "The wound needs to be checked in 4 hours," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." The ghost of a real smile then, the first one she'd seen that hadn't been dragged out by crisis or pain. It changed his face entirely, made him look, briefly, like someone who had once expected good things and had long since stopped expecting them, surprised to find one here anyway. Outside, the rain had stopped. The harbor lay quiet beneath the city lights. Somewhere in the building's lower floors, Slade was tidying up the remains of a very bad evening with the calm efficiency of a man who had done it before and would likely do it again. And Orla Devane, who had come to Cole Harbor to save her brother and had somehow in the middle of all of it saved herself instead, stayed.